Hi, everybody. This is Kate Haley with Glazer's Camera, and welcome to day 5 of Photofest, the virtual edition. As many of you know, we normally host this event over a 2-day period on a weekend in the summertime, and because of the COVID-19, we have decided to do this virtually. So, throughout this week, we're bringing you over 20 sessions live from all over the country with different brands, different instructors, and it's just been a lot of fun. Today's topic is going to be on travel and storytelling. But before we get to that, I just want to share a little bit about how Glazers is operating right now. The store is open Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 for limited capacity shopping. So if you're interested in swinging by to look at a particular product, that kind of thing, we are open Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. You can also place your orders online and do curbside pickup, or we can ship things to you. As well, our rentals department is open Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. So as the city continues to open, hopefully those hours are going to expand and we'll kind of shift back to our weekends open and all of that good stuff. So look for updates on that. So right now, though, we're going to talk about travel and storytelling with Erica Robinson from Tamron. So Erica, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll just go right on into the presentation because we know we have a little bit of time. We will do Q&A, but we're going to hold all the questions and answers till the end. So Erica, let's go ahead and kick it off with you.
Great, sure. Well, hi, everybody. My name is Erica Robinson. Thank you so much for the introduction. I am a national tech rep with Tamron USA. I've been with Tamron for, I think, almost 5 years now, and I absolutely love what I do. I have a wonderful team, and the great part about being on such a great team is that we all think very, very differently. We're all very different style of photographers. So I get to learn from all 9 people on my team. And I encourage you guys to all do that as well, especially while you have kind of some different time on your hands now. I encourage you to spend time with different photographers. That way you can just, have a new experience out there with photography. If you've never, kind of dabbled in travel and storytelling, and this is new to you, that's great. If you've never done anything with macro or portrait and lighting or anything like that, this is a great time to learn. So anyway, without further ado, I'm going to share my screen here and jump right in. All right. So if you get I hope that you get a lot of things from this presentation, but if you get just one very specific thing from this talk today, I hope it's that you are inspired, that you are inspired to photograph new things, that you're inspired to think outside of the box, that you're inspired to try new styles of photography, again, whether that's macro or portrait and lighting, or if you're not much of a traveler and you're doing work right in your backyard, there are lots of stories to be told. So I hope, if anything out of this today, that you get inspired to try something new. Storytelling is one of those beautiful concepts that, again, whether it's right in your backyard or 19 hours away on a plane to Australia, there is so much out there to learn and to grow with. So I hope you are inspired after all of this. But for the first section of my presentation, I like to kind of talk about the different genres of photography that we find ourselves in as travel photographers and storytellers. We find ourselves in every different pocket of photography. We find ourselves dabbling in landscape, in wildlife, in portraits, in sports, in literally everything out there that the world has to offer. So we kind of have to know a little bit of everything while we're out there. So normally, if we were in the classroom, I would like to pick on you guys and make you guys shout out some names. But because I can't see those right now, I'm going to give you guys some names of photographers that I find inspiring, that I have learned from. I may not photograph like them in any way, but I still may be able to learn something like that, something from them. For example, I shot weddings for 5 or 6 years. And as much as I know that I didn't want to be in the wedding photography business forever by any means, it was just not what I was passionate about. I learned so much from those 5 or 6 years in my photography and how to put that into my future work. So regardless of whether you consider yourself one or many of these genres of photography, you can still learn something from each of them. So as far as landscape photographers go, There are a few, of course, that we all admire. I know we all want to be the late great Ansel Adams. Who doesn't? I don't know who's going to be the next one, but there's certainly going to be someone amazing out there. But then there's people like Mandy Lea, who I believe is actually a Nikon ambassador. Correct me, of course, if I'm wrong, but she's an incredible photographer. She works in her little teardrop trailer and drives around the country creating some amazing images. And then there's people like Erin Sullivan. Those you may, if you know her as Erin Outdoors on Instagram. She does some really, really great work as well. If you have any other names as well, I'll feel free to type them into that little chat box there or into the YouTube channel if you're listening. Again, I may not be able to see them, but the great thing is that everybody else will, and they may get something from that new name. Um, Wildlife photographers. Let's see who. So the first one that comes to mind for me would be Joel Sartore. Joel Sartore has been working on a over a decade long project called the Photo Arc, documenting wildlife, endangered wildlife specifically, for conservation work for the future, so that we can have this platform into understanding that these animals did exist, and what happened to their history. And then there's other wildlife photographers like Paul Nicklen and Cristina Mittermeier, who do some incredible ocean work for conservation. People like David Akoubian, who's an incredible birder. He is actually an image master, and I find his work amazing. Not to mention, he knows every bird name under the sun. For those of you who are birders, I give you guys so much credit because you have so much patience when it comes to waiting for the photograph. And then there's Amy Vitale, who is actually, I adore her. I think she has incredible work. I'm inspired by her all the time. She kind of fits into multiple categories as well. So if you haven't heard of any of those names, I definitely encourage you to look them up and learn from them. And then with macro photographers, right? People like my coworker, Jillian Bell. She's a wonderful macro photographer. I joke with her all the time that her and I could be out at the Grand Canyon photographing this beautiful vista, and she would be turned around photographing this tiny little rock. And I love that about her because she sees the world so much differently than I do. And that is how we learn, and that is how we grow, and that is how we share our stories. And then there's other people like Mike Moats, who's also an image master. He does some incredible, what he calls macro landscapes, which I find beautiful and a very different way of looking at macro. And then someone I found recently just online, a gentleman by the name of Levon Bliss, who does some really incredible large format macro work. So if you haven't heard of him, I would check out all those names as well. And then last but not least, my, of course, favorite genre of photography, thinking about travel and storytelling. I could rattle off a million names here, but I'll rattle off a few of my favorite. Deanne Fitzmaurice, Amy Vitale, who I mentioned earlier as a wildlife photographer, but she's also a brilliant storyteller and does more work outside of wildlife and conservation as well. People like David Scott Holloway and Lindsay Addario, John Stanmeyer, my coworker, Andre Constantini. So all of these names, I hope that you are able to check them out in the future and be inspired by their work. So before we dig into more of the storytelling portion of things, I want to talk a little bit about building our photograph, because I think that composition really is key when it comes down to creating something unique to us, unique to our photography and our style of work. Because we can create a technically perfect image, right? It can be exposed for properly. Everything can be technically perfect, but if there's not much oomph to it, really, if we don't have any kind of pizzazz to it that makes it unique to us, there's not really anything exciting for our viewer to look at. So I encourage you to think about different kind of what I call puzzle pieces to our image. With these things you can see off on the right hand side there, your focal point, leading line, scale, all of these pieces that I, again, consider puzzle pieces. Starting with something like focal point. As we know, our focal point is our main part in our frame. It's our main view, where our image, our viewer's eye goes directly to this one spot as soon as we show them the image, whether that's a print or it's digital online, your viewer's eye goes directly to that spot. That is your focal point. And how does your viewer get there? They get there a lot of times through leading lines. Now, leading lines in this case, yes, are man-made, but leading lines don't have to be man-made. They can be made from motion, like you see here with all of the kind of moving kind of brush in the foreground there. They can be made by light, of course, because we don't have photography without light, most importantly. They can be made by silhouettes. They can be made by so many different things. And there's also no rule saying that there's just one, there has to be just one leading line in your image. There can be multiple, right? In this case, we have, I want to say maybe 3 or 4, where we have the path on the right-hand side. And yes, that is man-made. But then we have all of these cool shadows coming in from the left-hand side, moving our viewer's eye directly to the right side of our frame. And then, of course, this horizon line right there, moving our viewer's eye again right to the top right of that frame to our silhouetted subjects. So your leading lines, again, there doesn't have to be just one. There can be multiple, and they can be made from so many different things. And while it sounds like we're kind of overthinking a lot of these things are done subconsciously. You're doing them within your imagery and you don't even notice. But when you go back and you kind of cull through that kind of section of photographs that you're looking at, you'll be able to notice the different intricacies that you're doing without even noticing you're doing it in the first place. Another piece to that puzzle there is, of course, your perspective. So people will hate when I tell them this. I'm really sorry, but sometimes you have to lay on the ground to get the photo that you want. Don't lay in a puddle like I did when I came to this particular image. But sometimes you have to lie on the ground. Sometimes you have to climb a ladder. Sometimes you have to stand on a rock, whatever it may be, to get that particular perspective and angle that you want for your image, so that you can show your viewer a different side of that frame, right? So that can even be, minuscule kind of tiny movements. So even if I were to move, 2 inches over to the right, you wouldn't see that little yellow leaf down on the bottom left. It would just be lost. And then there wouldn't be another leading piece into our frame. So little movements make a really big difference. Now, one of the last pieces to this kind of composition part here that I think is probably the most forgotten, I would say, out of those puzzle pieces is our scale. Scale is, I think, because we as the photographer, we were there in that space. We saw how big or how small the landscape was, or how big or how small this little macro flower kind of scene that we're working on actually is. So when we put something in our frame that our brain naturally knows the measurement to it, understands how big or how small it is, it will help our brain and our viewer understand measurement to our scene a bit more. So if you're a documentary photographer and you are documenting coins, right? You're doing some macro work. If you have a ruler in there next to it, or if there's another coin that we know how big it is, that will help it out. All different things to kind of help our viewer understand scale and size. Sounds not important, but I think later on it does really help our images. So kind of putting all of those pieces together, as I said, I do kind of think it sounds like we are, over analyzing all of these pieces, but naturally we are looking for a focal point. We are looking for that rule of thirds. We're looking for framing and for reflections. We're looking for all of these different pieces to help our viewer understand the scene that we're trying to show them. So I encourage you to, when you have a set of images, let's say you haven't been out there photographing for a couple of weeks, but you have a batch of images that you photographed, within the last couple of months, something fairly fresh to you, right? Go ahead back in over that set of images and cull through, and you'll start to recognize the things that you've been doing recently when it comes to framing up your image and creating a composition and a style that's unique to you. Personally, I didn't think I had a style actually up until recently, and a friend of mine called and said, man, every time I scroll through Instagram, I can tell when I see your images come up because that looks like an Erica image photo. I was like, okay, I didn't even know I had a style until that. So most of the time it's subconscious, but it's great to be able to know that you have a style that people recognize. So that actually leads me into another kind of tip that I have for you guys about spending time with our scene. I think that as travelers, because we're always on the go, right? We have so much that we want to see within a short period of time. A lot of times we don't take the time to really appreciate what the scene has to offer, and understand even that something even a short span of time is going to change within that frame, right? Our subject may change, the light's going to change for sure. Even within just a couple of minutes, something in that scene will change. So I encourage you to kind of stick around for a little while and see what that scene has to offer you. Um, this example here, so I think I have 4 images here that I'm going to show you. I was out in LA waiting for my coworker, and I saw this guy ride his bike right up onto the beach, up to the lifeguard shacks. And I was kind of confused as to why he rode his bike up on the beach, because it was a road bike. It had really skinny tires. It wasn't a mountain bike or anything like that. So I just kind of started snapping a few photos, and was curious as to what he was doing. A couple of minutes later, he actually scares away all of the seagulls that were over onto the left. So I keep taking a few photos, and I realize that it's actually even better than the original one, because it starts to kind of fill in all of that negative space over to the left. That there was just, in this first image, it's just a picture, and that's okay. But there's definitely a lot missing. There's more that can happen in this scene. So over about a span of 45 minutes, within the next couple of minutes, I'm going to show you, there's a lot that drastically changed within the scene. There was a surfer that came out of the water. She was about my age, and she sat down relatively close to me and was just kind of like cleaning up her board or whatever. We got to talking because I used to surf, and we kind of we're just talking about the water and just talking about her surf that day and that kind of thing, and her board. And before I know it, we're joking around, and I have her board on top of my head, and I am turned towards the city behind me, and I notice this really unbelievable reflection of the city in the top of the surfboard. So knowing what I know about now the scene that I was photographing prior to that moment, and the light that has changed and the equipment that I have with me, the scene changes drastically. I turn back towards the lifeguard shacks. I take my 15 to 30. I look like a complete fool because I'm balancing a surfboard on my head, a camera in my right hand, my bag on my left foot. Like, it's ridiculous. But waiting around throughout that scene, definitely changed from first now to third image. And even with that, I've now kind of developed a friendship with this person that I'm talking with. We've broken down that barrier, and I'm no longer a threat to her or anything like that. We've had some great conversation. So now that the light has changed even more, I ask if she will go, kind of pose for a photo for me, and stand up there in between the lifeguard shacks for kind of a nice environmental portrait. So over a span of about 45 minutes, because I waited out my frame, I waited out that scene, the place had a lot more that it could tell me. It had a lot more to offer and a lot more of an opportunity there, instead of just taking a quick picture, turning around, and walking away. And I think that goes for nearly every scene that we have out there with whatever we are photographing. Something is going to change in that scene. And I know that our family really hates when they go out with us because we want to spend 6 hours at one scene, and they don't. They want to spend like 5 minutes. So sometimes it takes going out, on a workshop with other photographers, or spending time with other photographers, or, whatever the case may be, to try and spend time there. So this slide here, I know, is a whole lot of words, and I did not write them. I will admit that. This was from a Nat Geo magazine that I found years ago now, and it just kind of resonated with me. And so you're welcome to take a quick screenshot out of it if you like, or write a few words of it down. But I think it really helps put some things into perspective for me. So I'm going to read you a little portion of it. Landscapes come in all forms: mountains, forests, plains, etc. Each have their own characteristics, and individual sites within each category have their own too. Whatever type of landscape you are shooting, think about what the essential qualities are and not just the visual ones. Think about how the place makes you feel and what kind of emotions it stirs in you, and then look for ways to get those qualities and feelings onto film. So again, normally if we were in class, I would kind of pick on you and make you answer these questions for you and ask you what it means. But in my opinion, I think a lot of what this means is to make sure that I am properly telling the narrative of that scene, that I am making sure that I am um, kind of giving the right atmosphere to my viewer, and that my viewer can truly understand what I felt and what I saw in that space at that time, right? So while we have two mountain scenes here, they're two very different mountain scenes. They are one on the left is the Tetons, one on the right is a peak in Norway called Galdhøpiggen. And while they're definitely mountain scenes, obviously they're two very different spaces, and I wanted to make sure that I showed my viewer that in the proper way. So on the right hand side, I used a really wide lens, and I made sure that I showed them the entire scene, this kind of very rocky, intense type place. While it's still beautiful, it is intense. And then on the left hand side, you have something that's a little bit warmer, late afternoon sun, some really kind of like nice Wild West type feel, right? So two very different scenes. I wanted to make sure that I put those emotions onto film properly. All right, so now to get into a bit of our storytelling here. Of course, I gave you the definition, and I did not write this definition. This, of course, came from the dictionary. In photographic practice, visual storytelling is often called a photo essay or a photo story. It's a way for a photographer to narrate a story with a series of photographs. Captions are also an integral part of a story, of a photo story. They could help the viewer understand your image. Okay, so I think where I want to start with that a lot of times is the why, right? Thinking about why we storytell. For me, it's definitely something that I'm extremely passionate about. That I kind of can't avoid it no matter how much I want to. It's just something that comes natural. But I find that these are my four kind of top reasons as to why I do what I do and how I think the way I do. First of all, because it brings a topic to light. Whether that's good, bad, indifferent, or on any subject, it makes someone else, even if it's just one person, it makes them aware of a topic. Reason number two, because it gives voices to those who haven't been heard. And I actually recently rephrased this section here, because oftentimes we hear, well, storytellers are giving voices to the voiceless. And I was listening to one of my favorite photographers the other day, a gentleman by the name of Patrick Brown, who photographed some, incredibly intense stories. If you look him up, just be warned for his page. Some things can get intense, but they're incredible stories that need to be told. But anyway, I digress. He was talking about how he was asked in an interview how he feels about being able to give a voice to the voiceless. And he said, "Well, I'm not giving a voice to the voiceless." He said, "It's just some people don't want to hear it. Everyone and everything has a voice. It's just sometimes people aren't listening." So I think that we truly are giving voices to those who haven't yet been heard, and we just are the tool in the middle to help them get their story told, whether that's about land, animals, children. It's a humanitarian issue, a global environmental issue. There's lots of things that can be told, and these all don't have to be super intense. They can be very happy stories as well. It can be about someone's birthday party, a 90th birthday party. It can be something very happy, but we are giving a voice to someone who hasn't been heard. Reason number three, because it creates genuine human connection. A lot of the people that I have photographed in the past, whether they are in the US or not, I have not only stayed in touch with them, but then I have also given them images back. So I have either emailed them their image or printed them their image if they don't have access to email or a way to digitally connect. If I'm going back again, I physically print them images and bring them back. It just kind of brings that whole human connection full circle. And it shows also that we're not there as photographers just to take, that we're also there to give as well, and that we're there to connect and create a real connection, not just something that's quick, easy, gone, and you're away with their information, right? Because it is their story at the end of the day. It's not ours. We're just the tool. So lastly, my fourth reason here is that it is sometimes for us to get us out of our comfort zone, because that is the only way we are going to grow, to learn, to share, is if we get out of our comfort zone. So I do think it has as much of an impact on us as the photographer as it does the person, place, or thing that we are photographing. So another couple of examples here, just of of what we were just talking about when it comes to why we storytell. This is out here in Southern California, and for those of you who have been down here during poppy season, these are the beautiful, beautiful poppies that bloom out in these just massive fields in the mountains. And I admit, as I'm not much of a birder, I'm also not much of a flower photographer because I don't know much about them. But I found it fascinating to see them in their prime. I had never seen them before. I just moved out to Southern California a couple of years ago. So last year, when I went out to photograph this big super bloom, they call it, from a distance, it was beautiful. And then as I got up close, I realized that there was all of these signs and barriers for people not to walk through. And as you can see here, it clearly states that the area is closed, don't enter, and that the poppies are going to thank you. But you see a whole bunch of people in there just kind of trampling over everything. Now, were they roaming throughout the entire fields? No. But they definitely make an impact on that one little space there that's not going to grow back. And then if you looked behind me and off to the right, there was people doing that everywhere. So it wasn't just in one little space. And now all of these patches aren't going to grow back. So this image here, I found kind of very straightforward, very to the point, telling a story of that place, because the place can't necessarily speak for itself. And then other images, sometimes when it comes to telling its story, sometimes there's quite a few layers to it, right? And it will help with captions or information to go along with it to understand the story of that place. Now this is in Havana, Cuba. And for those of you who have been to Cuba, you know that the people are absolutely lovely and the place is incredible. But it has a very deep history. It has a very layered history, especially when it comes to generations. And this spot here is a place called the Melicone, which is the right against the water, and this amazing kind of wallway that they have there with all of the hotels and buildings built off to the left hand side, and all the cars. There's a main highway that rides right next to it. Now, for a while, Cubans weren't necessarily a fan of the sea, because history says that every time they looked towards the sea, they got conquered somehow. So they weren't necessarily a big fan of what would come from looking out to the sea. So that generation had a bit of fear of it. Now, if you go there at night, a lot of times you'll see people, young kids specifically, kind of hanging out on the Melicone and enjoying their time there, having dates there, talking on the phone, trying to get internet service, having little parties. So it's a really happy place for people to be. So generationally, things have changed for this specific place. And then off to the right hand side, you will also see in graffiti, kind of faded graffiti, you're going to see 2 + 2 = 5. Now, I'm not a mathematician, but I do know that 2 + 2 does not equal 5. 2 + 2 = 4. This is a graffiti artist, and in his way, he wants to tell people that something is just not right here. We love Cuba, we love being Cuban, but something is just not right here. And this is his way of talking about that. So when you're looking for your stories and you look for small details that really help you understand a place, I found that, I've been there, I think 3 or 4 times now, probably 4 times. And this was the first time that I found this graffiti off to the right. And I found the more times that the more times that I wind up in this place, the deeper I understand it. And finding this 2 + 2 = 5 right on that spot really made a difference to how I understand the layers of this place. And then, of course, lastly, when we talk about getting to know or creating genuine human connection, this is a gentleman named Jerry, who I photographed, I think, 3 or 4 years ago now, out in Oregon, out by you guys. I did not know that the the beaches late at night, if it's low tide, turn into a highway that you can physically drive up and down the beach. I grew up on the East Coast where beaches are small. You don't physically drive on the beach. You'll get arrested for doing that. But on the West Coast, apparently it's a thing where you can drive up and down the beach. And I didn't know that. I was out there one night photographing a shipwreck called the Peter Iredale out in Fort Stevens, I think, State Park. And, about 11 o'clock at night hits and just mass amounts of cars and trucks start driving up and down the beach. And I'm still there photographing. I'm standing in the middle of the beach, not knowing what's going on. And this guy stops. Turns out it was Jerry. And he says, "Well, what are you doing here?" I said, "Well, I'm photographing a ship on the beach. What are you doing here?" And he was the one who told me that the beach turns into a highway at night and that they are clamming, they're fishing. So he takes he has this like sack over his shoulder, flips it over and dumps out all the clams. And he said, "See, we're just out here fishing. You should be careful." I said, "Oh, thank you so much for letting me know. I really appreciate that." He said, "Well, do you want to take any pictures of them?" I said, "Absolutely." So I took a couple of pictures of the clams, and then he leaned down to move them, to kind of move them around. And I realized it was even a much better image with him in it. It gave it much more context. I said, "I'm definitely not taking the images. The images with just the clams definitely aren't as good as the ones with you in there. So we're going to take some more pictures with you." We moved around his shovel back there with the light to give him a bit of light right under his hat and light up his face, make sure he was most important in the frame. But it does, again, storytelling creates that amazing human connection that I've now broken down this barrier with this person. I talk to him actually quite frequently. I've sent him prints, and I'm sure I'll go out there and photograph him once again. So I want to quickly kind of touch on single image stories versus multiple image stories. Single image stories have to be powerful. They tell a singular story or multiple stories actually all in one frame. Everything is right there. Whereas, in multiple frames or in multiple image stories, they're kind of like chapters in a book. We have a beginning, a middle, and an end. We are directing this narrative where we have kind of our peaks and our valleys, just like we are reading a book. How do we do things like this? First of all, research. Research is key in all of this. The more time we spend with our subject, the better we're going to be able to portray that story and portray the narrative correctly. And I want to make sure, especially, that we are telling the narrative that this person, place, or thing wants us to tell. That yes, I understand that everyone has biases. There are biases in everything, just because we are human, but that we're doing our best to get across the facts of that place. Next, don't be afraid to fail. All successful people have failed. Now, I've told you one of my idols, Amy Vitale, who I think is an absolutely wonderful photographer. She was doing a talk a couple of weeks ago where she talked about submitting her project to Nat Geo, her rhino story that she's been working on for forever. She submitted that a couple of times and got rejected. And now it's one of the most famous stories out there. So don't be afraid to fail. Keep trying. Next up, controlling your composition. We talked a lot about that and how to frame up our image and how important that is to creating our story, because little changes can be really powerful within our frame. Next up, lighting. Photography only exists because of lighting. And we can tell a major story based on just light. This one beam of light coming right through our frame, landing on our subject, that can make all the difference. And time. Spend time with your subject, spend time on your story and really uncover all of its layers before putting it out there. I've spent years on specific projects, and maybe I don't know where they'll go. I don't know if they'll really go anywhere. They're important to me either way. But I think spending time with them is very, very important. And I often get asked how you photograph people. I have a lot of people in my feed there, a lot of people that I've photographed over the years. And one of the best pieces of advice that I can offer you is to give someone a compliment. Okay. You compliment someone, they are going to be a lot more social with you and enjoy your company a bit more. Whereas if you tell them that they look like crap that day, it's really not going to go over very well, right? You're not going to get a great reaction from them, right? Whereas giving somebody a compliment you've now kind of broken down that barrier. And you can ask them to take a photograph, or you can ask them to hang out for a few minutes and, oh, I'm going to photograph. If you're doing that over there, can I take a few pictures? Is that okay? And usually it's not a problem. However, if somebody says no, that's okay. It's okay for somebody to say no, move on to your next subject, and you just go on to the next. It is all right. Don't feel that you failed. Still keep trying after that. And another tip when it kind of comes to that is to remember that oftentimes people see cameras everywhere now, right? Everyone is being photographed all the time. So remember that some people are kind of sensitive to it, right? And we don't want our camera to be viewed as a threat. We don't want us to be viewed as a threat, the camera to be viewed as a threat. We want to leave someone with a really good taste in their mouth about us and about photography and about imagery and about storytelling when we leave them, because we may never see them again, right? So this image here, I was out in Miami in Little Havana, and this gentleman works or he owns one of the biggest cigar factories there. And he sees tourists all the time come in and out. So the first time that I went into his shop, I put my camera away. I knew that I wanted to take some photos in there. I knew I wanted to photograph him because I thought he was really interesting, but I put my camera away. Talked to them, talked to everybody in there for a few minutes, and then I left. I came back like an hour later. Um, I ended up buying some cigars, ended up talking with them, and my camera was still away. It was still in my bag because I wanted to make sure that they understood that I wasn't there just to take and not give. So I spent a few minutes with them. I noticed that he had Hebrew written on his forearm. And my family's Jewish. I have family in Israel, and I was curious as to why this Cuban guy had Hebrew written on his forearm. I was like, well, this is really cool. This is an interesting connection. So we started talking about that. He tells me that he's going to be opening one of the first cigar factories, or Cuban cigar factories, in Israel because of a certain soil that they have there. So I thought that was fascinating. So I asked if I could take a few images. And for somebody to be able to let you into details of their life, these are his tattoos, these are on his body, these are very special to him, means that I had been able to break down that barrier with him, for him to even let me do that, right? So spend time with your subject, and remember that we want to create a great camaraderie with them for the next time we go back and visit. So now thinking about our single images, right? Our single images have to be powerful all in one image. So in this particular image, I wanted to make sure that I showed the power of the weather at that time, and just showing the waves and just showing the sky didn't necessarily give the entire story. So I used the people that were off on the right hand side as my main subject, so that you could really feel the force of the wind that day and understand the weather a bit more. And I talked about, within your single images, really needing to use light and making sure light was prominent in your frame. And when I say light, I don't mean that everything has to be super bright. I mean that you're using light in a directional way, that it cuts through darkness in a certain way, or that you're really taking advantage of the dark pieces in your image, whatever that may be, to understanding light. In this particular image, the light made some really great shapes, and it landed on these awesome cleaning supplies that were off on the right hand side, while in a place that's incredibly dirty and kind of falling apart. So it told a bit of a deeper story that way. And then lastly here, I want to make sure that we talk about a series of images to create a story, right? So in this story, I think I maybe have 8 or 10 frames in here that I'm going to show you. But when we talk about having a story that's multiple images, and I talk about it being like a book, we do have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it tells a narrative throughout that with peaks and valleys, and introduces characters just like a book would. So first, we have to introduce our place. Okay, so here you see our place is at Bombay Beach. It's a place. Out here in California, next to what's called the Salton Sea, which is actually a fake sea. It was kind of a mistake, but it's dry and it's in the desert, and it is there's only like 200 people in this town. It's a very interesting place, and I think you can kind of see that in this image. You get a very good understanding of the location and the setting. Okay. I start introducing characters a little bit, but notice that I don't introduce faces. You just kind of you see a bit more of the scene and a bit more of the town. So you're really getting to know your place more than you are the character, right? So this is a guy named Jack. I was out photographing for a particular project out here, and my subject that day was nowhere to be found. My subject had disappeared. So I decided I was going to find a new subject for the day. And these guys were the only two guys in town that were awake at like 7 in the morning. And so I'm out in the middle of the street. I said, "Hey, my name's Erica and I'm working on a photo project. And I'm hoping one of you wouldn't mind being my subject for the day. Is that cool?" And the guy in the front, his name is Jack. He said, "Hell yeah, girl, let's go." I said, "Okay, great." So Jack turned out to be my subject for the day. And he is the plumber of the town. He is the kind of, no pun intended, but he's like the jack of all trades. He does a little bit of everything. He is their electrician, construction, everything, right? So I've now introduced a bit more of the understanding of who this character is, right? But up until now, we didn't know what he looked like. So I wanted to make sure that I brought in an image where you saw his face, where you knew exactly, you could put a face with a name, right? So in my first kind of half of the story, and what I thought was going to happen, what it was just going to be, it was just going to be Jack and about him for the day. And then he says, "Well, why don't you, I'm going to go get some lunch. You can come back and meet Steffi if you want." Steffi is his wife. I said, "Okay, that's awesome. Great." So I go back and I meet Steffi, but in my story, I know that I have to introduce this secondary character, that I can't just all of a sudden have a picture of this person and know that she's introduced, right? So this was my way of telling you that they have a connection. We don't necessarily know what their connection is yet, but we've brought in this secondary character. Now, of course, I put a face with a name, and this is our secondary character. This is Steffi. Then I want to make sure that we understand their relationship, right? We knew that they had a connection before, but what was that actual connection? So I bring in a little bit of a detail here, and you can see that he has Steph written on his ring finger. We now know that they are married, they are a couple, and this is their home together, right? So I then want to make sure that I bring in their home, and we know a little bit more about their life in the sense of, well, everything is very colorful, right? This is their place, their humble abode. And then lastly, so before I left for the day, I wanted to take a portrait of just the two of them so that I could send them back a portrait from the day, so that I had something to give them, since they offered me their entire day and spent so much time with me. I wanted to make sure I could send them a print back. And before I took the actual portrait of them where they're looking at me, they went right over, sat down at the couch, and they just looked at each other with this absolutely just beautiful, beautiful connection. And so I ended it more as a love story of the two of them. What started out as just a story of Jack the plumber ended up as this beautiful love story between him and his wife, Steffi. So I know that's a lot of information within a short time, but that is kind of our two ways of discussing travel and storytelling, and how to tell deeper stories within our images. So this is, I want to leave you with a couple of tips here.
Hey, Erica.
One, make sure you do your research, be patient. And I know that's hard because I'm not the most patient person on the planet. I'll admit that. Practice as much as you can and be prepared. This is me. You can find me on social media as Tamron Tech Erica on both Facebook and Instagram. Thank you so much for being with me today and hanging out. Again, I hope that if you have anything that you are inspired to photograph more, I'm going to bring Kate back in so she can maybe help me with some questions. And again, yeah, thank you. I hope to catch you on the road sometime soon.
All right. Erica, thanks so much for all of that. The questions, there's just been some comments about how they're enjoying the session. We actually haven't had any questions come in. So
oh, good. All right. Well,
since we're also light on time, I'm just going to thank everybody for joining us today. I do have one request, though. Could you maybe, at the beginning, you listed off a bunch of photographers. Could you maybe send me an email with that list, and we'll publish that to our YouTube channel in the description once I get that from you. So a lot of people would like to check out some of those photographers you mentioned. So if you could maybe just send me a list of those, that would be great.
Yeah, sure thing. I can do that.
And thank you so much. Couple things before we wrap. Thank you, Erica, for that presentation and all of that information. It's really great to have you guys at Tamron as a partner, and we appreciate your time during this week. If you registered for the session, you should have gotten an email this morning that had some Tamron specials in it. So if you're interested in buying some new lenses, you could maybe get a deal on a Tamron lens right now. So check that out. If you haven't registered yet, there's still time to take advantage of those offers. Just go to glazersphotofest.com/register. Go ahead and register. Be sure you tick the box for Tamron so that you get those deals, and you should get that email tomorrow. You can also call the store with any questions about that. So we're going to wrap up this session. Thank you again, Erica. We'll be back online in just a few minutes at 1 p.m. with a new topic, and we'll see you online shortly. So thanks again, Erica.
Thank you. Bye, guys.